Welcome, everybody, to Unraveling the Unexplained. My name is Kat, and I'm a longtime astral traveler and spirit consultant. This is my brother John, longtime fan of the creepy and the paranormal.
Hello.
He has picked out a video for me to react to. I don't know what it is, but we are about to find out together.
There have been hundreds of reported poltergeist cases since the 6th century, some more high profile than others, with the famous Enfield case of the late 70s probably being the most repeated, referenced and talked about, especially after the recent release of James Wan's The Conjuring 2, which is very loosely based on it. This case has been covered many times before, so I won't go over old ground. Are we talking about another case?
The Conjuring. I've watched a bunch of the ones that are based on that same couple, the Warrens or whatever.
Yeah, strike me as movies you'd be into.
Yeah, I mean, I like scary movies to begin with. We've talked about doing some, maybe reviewing some scary movies on here to talk about some of that. We can get into that at some point if we feel like we have the time.
Yeah, it seems like it's something that'd be cool to do.
But yeah, no, I have watched the Conjuring movies and the Nun movies, and
Might be interesting to get your take on those.
yeah, I mean, the movies obviously are beefed up for dramatic effect and stuff, and then you ruined the Nun for me. Like, this dude, we were watching The Nun. I can't even remember which nun it was, but he starts talking like Emperor Palpatine every time she comes on the screen.
Well, frickin' the nun is, wearing this dark cloak, has this wrinkly, face in this dark cloak. Frickin' looks like Emperor Palpatine.
Vibe killer, 100%. I can't even watch it the same way anymore, for sure. But yeah, we could get into doing some movie reviews, too. Let us know in the comments if you think some movie reviews would be fun, too.
A case that shook the residents of Byron Street in Runcorn, England in 1952. And although it was big news back then, the tale hasn't really stood the test of time. So, for the sake of raising awareness for a little-known legend, this is the story of the Byron Street Poltergeist. It all began on Sunday the 17th of August 1952, when the occupants of number 1 Byron Street in Runcorn, on the south banks of the River Mersey, settled in for the evening. The house was very cramped with its 5 occupants, 68-year-old Sam Jones, his widowed daughter-in-law Lucy Jones, his young granddaughter, his 17-year-old grandson John Glynn, and finally an elderly lodger by the name of Ellen Whittle. All the residents except for Miss Whittle shared one bedroom consisting of 2 beds. Miss Whittle had her own room as she was paying for the lodgings. After the family settled down to sleep that Sunday evening, they began to hear scratching noises coming from the chest of drawers. After investigation, they found nothing, putting the interruption down to mice. So they settled down again, but the noises continued. Over the coming days, the activity became increasingly worse, with the scratching noises now having evolved into loud knocking sounds, which seemed to come from all corners of the house. But the phenomenon didn't end at disembodied sounds. The family claimed that furniture and household items were thrown around, and objects hung unsuspended in mid-air. Now convinced that a ghost was at work, the head of the household, Sam Jones, called in the police, who then also experienced the poltergeist activity firsthand after it threw them from the chest of drawers that they sat upon at the foot of the staircase. Ultimately, there was nothing they could do. Bewildered from their experience, the police left the house. In a desperate attempt to put an end to this apparent haunting, they called in a medium by the name of Philip France of the Runcorn National...
There you go. I always find it amusing or interesting when people experience something like this and they call the police.
First of all, it's what do you expect the police to do about it?
Right. I feel like it's almost people are just looking for some sort of authoritative confirmation. Do you know what I mean? I don't know what you thought the police were going to do.
But maybe they just, you want somebody to confirm, hey, this weird stuff's happening. Can somebody who has more official capacity come over here and kind of document this and, prove we're not crazy?
Exactly. At least come look at it. Maybe if the police investigate, they can find some mundane reason for it, is maybe the thought process for people. I don't know.
Just to have somebody else there checking it out,
Right.
Who else are you going to call? The Ghostbusters aren't a thing.
Well, even then, I would have thought maybe, a friend or, neighbors or maybe your local parish people, do you know what I mean? Something like that. But the police are going to...
They're not going to arrest the ghost.
They're not going to make an arrest. Yeah, exactly. Domestic violence is a thing, right? But when you're talking about a paranormal domestic violence, the police aren't going to be able to do much accountability-wise about that. So.
Yeah.
That's always interesting to me.
But now they got a medium involved.
Poor police, they get called for all kinds of things that they're just like...
We're not trained for this.
Yeah, the last video we did, it was like they were making police reports about the big beast that was on the road, and the police were like, I guess we'll drive out and go check it out, but I mean...
We're not animal control.
Right, exactly, and we're not certified in werewolf, you know?
Yeah.
Spiritualist church. It was agreed he would hold a one-man seance in the bedroom. According to him, objects were thrown around the room during his attempt at ridding the house of evil spirits. He then returned to the family, claiming that his job had been done. Even though the Byron Street family insisted they didn't want any media attention at the time, a report was written up in the Witness Weekly News on August the 29th, treating the case as an odd occurrence that had now been resolved. And for a while at least, it seemed that it had. But 3 weeks later, the poltergeist returned. By now, the press had named the poltergeist the Runcorn Thing, and again the activity was mostly concentrated in the small family bedroom. The chest of drawers rocked from side to side, and the drawers shot out across the room, which seems to be a common trait of poltergeist cases. Up to 100 people were said to have congregated outside the house one particular night, all eager to catch a glimpse of the spook, which they nicknamed Juker, which presumably was a cross between the words spook and joker, suggesting most believed the case to be faked. Despite the family's previous plea for privacy, Sam Jones, eager to be believed, began inviting people into the home to witness the events, and according to claims, some onlookers did see the poltergeist in action. The most notable person to witness them was Reverend W.H. Stevens, a minister in the nearby town of Widnes. He was also a member of the respected Society of Physical Research, and he visited the property on Monday the 22nd of September. He was well known as a skeptic, that is, until he set foot in the Byron Street house. On this particular night, young John Glynn had invited a friend, John Berry, to stay with his family, as his younger sister had now moved away temporarily until the case was resolved. Reverend Stevens performed a very public investigation that night. I say public because the people who had gathered outside were beginning to form a queue from the street into the house and up the stairs, with some managing to peer into the bedroom to witness the phenomenon for themselves. Whilst the boys lay in their beds, Stevens turned out the lights and...
I just have to say this because I think it does happen, right? Like, this is not... Spiritual is not a spectator sport, right? It's not grab your popcorn. That watch the nun is grab your popcorn, that's fine. But the more energy and attention you're feeding into something like this is a very not good situation. Like, now's the time to call the police. Like, if you were going to call the police for crowd control.
To clear the people out.
Disperse these people. They shouldn't be gathered around like this, right?
Yeah, we have a line outside our house. Can you please do something about that?
That the police can do, right, is to get these people away from your property or back people off. I mean, they can't really, if they're on public property, they can't really make them leave, but they can at least back them off and stuff. And try.
Yeah.
This is not a good thing to be,
Don't turn ghosts into a circus.
Well, it's not good to feed in this much eager energy to it. All of these people, I want to see something. I want to, you know what I mean? Like, don't feed that kind of extra energy into a situation that's already to the point where physical activity is happening. Like, that's not a good idea.
Just pouring a little extra fuel on the fire.
Exactly.
Was met with the familiar scratching sounds coming from the chest of drawers. Again, the drawers left their tracks and shot outwards. Then it began to shift from side to side. With this, Stevens turned on the lights. The chest of drawers was now completely still, but it had moved a few feet away from the wall, and the boys remained completely still in their beds. The rocking of the dressing table became so severe that at one point plaster began to fall from the ceilings in the room below. Soon after that, an alarm clock flew through the air and smashed onto the ground. A dictionary struck the minister on the head, and a heavy box turned over, all apparently of their own free will. If that wasn't enough, the two boys were then lifted from their beds and thrown to the floor. The news of the Runcorn thing had now spread further afield, and the family received a letter from Germany with instructions on how to rid the evil spirits once and for all. But the letter was opened in transit from Germany, and a page of the instructions was missing. There seemed to be a pattern emerging at 1 Byron Street. Most of the activity to date, or at least the activity witnessed by the people outside of the family, were at night, when it was too dark to make a definite decision.
I'm kind of curious about a letter that, like, a page was missing out of. That's interesting.
That is a little weird. That's not something the ghost would have done.
No, that was somebody. But it's weird that somebody would have opened it and removed a page. Like that's odd.
Like, classified information they didn't want out, or...
My bet, like, my instinct on it would be some very Christian person who thought some of the practices that were coming out of the old German ways of doing things were not Christian enough. Something was not...
Something was...
Yeah.
Was that a little too pagan for their taste?
Yeah, that would be my instinct on the matter of it. It's just odd that you would have opened somebody else's mail.
Unless somebody... I mean, I guess the person might have known what was in the letter already.
Maybe the local postman would know that address.
Yeah.
Right? And so maybe he was curious about letters that were being sent to the ghost address and opened it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So, okay, yeah, that's the best I got on that, but that is odd.
On what was causing it. That is until a local businessman saw for himself, in the light of a bright lamp, the dresser slamming itself against the wall violently, along with a cardboard box which was said to be suspended in midair over the bed. Curiously, orb-like specks of light were sometimes seen in the dimness of the rooms when the strange activity took place. Ellen Whittle was a lodger at 1 Byron Street for 15 years before any of the poltergeist activity took place. Her involvement in the case appears to be minimal, and she obviously kept a low profile during the media frenzy. Sadly though, on the 22nd of October 1952, Ellen inexplicably fell from a quarry named Frog's Mouth, whilst walking along nearby Runcorn Hill. She died from her injuries the following day on the 23rd of October. No connection was made between her death and the ghostly goings-on in her home, but if you have read any books on the subject, it is quite common for spirits to attach themselves to people and follow them out of their homes. If this was the case with Ellen, then maybe there was a connection. Did the spirits in her home follow her that day to the quarry, or did the sheer fear and dread of her 2-month ordeal prove too much, leading to Ellen taking her own life? Following the sudden death of Ellen, it did seem as if the poltergeist activity had completely wound down. On the very same day of her eventual passing, that's one day after her fall, BBC Television visited the premises to investigate further. They set up audio and camera equipment in the dark in the hope of catching poltergeist activity, or maybe to prove fraud. But nothing happened at all that night. In fact, nothing happened at all for the next 4 weeks. On the 26th of November, local historian Richard Whittington Egan says that he saw John's hand quickly slip beneath his bedsheets after he had shone a torch in his direction, following a knocking sound. On another occasion, 3 journalists and a local pub owner witnessed Sam Jones hurling a book against the wall. When confronted, he said he'd thrown it out of anger. This was damning evidence, of course, and naturally put the case in serious doubt. As with most paranormal cases, feelings of skepticism are strong, so if a questionable occurrence happens, or if it looks like someone might be playing games, then the cases are often written off from that moment on, even if there is a lot more evidence to support an actual poltergeist or haunting. But do these isolated incidents invalidate the rest of the evidence? As foolish as it may sound, this is actually a common reaction from victims of poltergeist cases. If journalists or anyone else arrive to see a miracle take place, the victims have been reported to fake the odd event in an attempt to validate their claim of a haunting if nothing is happening at that time. It's feasible to think that the following weeks of inactivity may have left Sam Jones feeling foolish, being as there was so much public expectation, and wanting to assure people that the poltergeist did exist, turned to the desperate measures of faking events in the house. So was this the last that Byron Street had seen of the poltergeist? Well, no, actually it wasn't. The final event took place in the house on the 13th of December 1952, when a bedroom carpet folded up by itself. This occurrence, although the last anyone would see within the 4 walls of 1 Byron Street, was not the last to happen in the area. Amazingly, it turns out that there was a parallel case taking place during the height of the activity at Byron Street, at nearby Poole Farm on Heath Road. Let's go back in time a little, to the 10th of August 1952. On that day, local farmer and owner of Poole Farm, Harold Crowther, said he'd witnessed the ghost of his late father-in-law roaming the grounds of his farm. Soon after that, Crowther found 3 of his pigs dead. They'd simply collapsed and died, with a post-mortem report concluding that their windpipes had been crushed. Within a couple of weeks, all 53 of Crowther's pigs had died mysteriously. It was soon after the death of the pigs that the black cloud began to appear, both inside and outside of Crowther's home. His wife also claims to have seen it, and Crowther himself even said that he'd seen it in the Byron Street house, floating above John Glynn's bed. On another occasion, he said that he had...
Pigs?
Remember when I said that it's not good to crowd around some activity like this in the expectation or hoping to see something, or...
Yeah, so you're saying, like, the crowds of people fueling the ghost made it go on a pig killing spree?
It may not even be the same thing. The behavior doesn't seem the same.
But it, like, maybe it triggered something else elsewhere, close by.
That's what I'm saying, is the expectation or the wanting, the excitedness of the situation, wanting something to happen.
That energy had to go somewhere.
Yeah, and so it, you ended up calling in your own little friend to play with.
Poor pigs.
Exactly. That's not, you don't want to play with things that it's not, like I said, it's not an amusement park ride. So it sounds to me, I'm not surprised that other incidences were happening in the area at the time, because people had that in their energy and were engaging with it.
Sort of makes me think of, like, say, the animals at Yellowstone. You don't want to go mess with the buffalo. They're going to react. This isn't, like, a park or a ride. These are wild animals. Don't go poking the buffalo.
People are often excited by the unexplained or the supernatural, which is, I think, a natural reaction to it. But yeah, much like anything else that you really can't control and don't know what's going to happen, you don't walk up and pet the buffalo. You don't,
Don't agitate the spirits.
I mean, not unless you want your dresser wrecked or your pig's dead. I mean, like, you don't know what's going to happen when you start doing that, basically. Right. So, and especially if you're not somebody who has a calm demeanor about it or knows what they're doing or feels confident in handling the situation, you're just asking for trouble for yourself, basically, which is not wise.
Yeah.
He had spoken to the poltergeist just before it hurled the farmer's overcoat into the air. Interestingly, the last day that Crowther claimed to have seen the black mist was the 13th of December, the same day the poltergeist vanished from Byron Street. According to him, he was attacked by what he described as a 7-foot black cloud with prong-like horns. The farmer set his dogs on the apparition after he said it tried to strangle him, but as the dogs hurled themselves towards it, the thing evaporated into thin air, never to return. Like many poltergeist cases before and since, all this seems very far-fetched, even to the most open-minded of people. And if you are a skeptic, then the fact that Farmer Crowther was Sam Jones's good friend and employer would make you wonder if they were in it together. So what did cause a poltergeist to descend upon the occupants of Byron Street? Well, it's common for poltergeists to feed off the vulnerabilities of the youngest of the group. In this instance, it would have been 17-year-old John, who was soon to be joining the army, which he was known to be anxious about. Also, the house was very cramped, with little room for him to go about his daily routine, and the fact that he was forced to share a bed with his grandfather may have added to his frustrations. It's believed that a high state of emotion, especially from a young adult, is perfect sustenance for a poltergeist, a life force for the spirit, if you like. Again, there are parallels here with the Enfield case, in which the theory was that the spirit fed off the highly strung, excitable personality of the young girls in the house, as well as their darker emotions following the divorce of their parents and the departure of their father. This theory also holds up if you consider that over time, at the Byron Street house, space was freed up. John's young sister was moved away to live with family, his grandfather began to sleep downstairs, and finally Ellen Whittle had passed away. All this would have made the living conditions far more bearable, and may have had a positive effect on John's mental state. Not to mention the introduction of his good friend John Berry, who stayed there for some time after his sister had left. So maybe this was the reason for the poltergeist's departure. Maybe the emotional torment John experienced in the early days was enough to attract the spirit in the first place, and the moment John's quality of life improved, and he became more content, the poltergeist moved on, unable to sustain itself. Or maybe it was Crowther who had brought the spirit into the house of his employee Sam, as he was known to visit quite frequently. The coinciding events at Paul Farm and Byron Street would help make a strong case for this theory. Or was it, as mentioned before, the late Miss Whittle, who played host to the ghostly goings-on? Her sudden death and the equally sudden fall in activity within the house is hard to disregard as coincidence. Or maybe it was just one big hoax. Maybe Sam Jones and Howard Crowther did work together to fabricate the whole thing. What do you think?
Since you asked, what do I think?
Yes, what do you think?
I think it's far more likely in this case the activity was either connected to the woman, Miss Ellen.
Yeah.
It isn't uncommon for things to become attached to young people. It's kind of a combination between more open-mindedness and more flexibility of the ego personality earlier in life and a heightened emotional state. Like, if you're an entity that is gaining momentum or wanting those strong human emotions, people who are going through adolescence, either just starting to come to maturity or are young and going through some things where hormones are not necessarily, the emotions all feel heightened. It is an attractive target or attachment just because the energies are so much stronger with somebody like that than they are from an older person who, you know, for lack of a better way of saying it, is kind of settled into the emotions of life and responds a little differently to them. You know what I mean?
I can't remember. Did the video mention her age?
It may have. I don't know if she was the older woman, or I can't remember exactly how old she was, but my initial impression on it when they said it was something she did herself. So, but it's, okay, so do I think she was physically pushed by a ghost? No. Was she potentially mentally or emotionally pushed by a ghost? Potentially. A different kind of push, but it's possible that through interactions, the impression she was getting, or the emotional impression she was getting, is that, you know, if she just, like, did this, then things would stop, or, you know, she may have been psychologically pushed by the experience to do something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, that was the end. Okay. Well, we will link this video in the description, and go check it out, click on it, like, give thumbs up to the original creators. They appreciate it, and so do we.
So, final thoughts.
I mean, with any kind of situation like this, the best thing to do is minimize the energy rather than amplifying it. So, you know, reaching out for help and assistance is completely natural, especially if you're, you know, if the people in the household are starting to get more and more afraid and more, you know, thinking there's some evil spirit happening and all of that type of thing, reaching out for some intervention is wise, right? But how do I say this? Like, not mad at the police or anything, but the mundane authorities are probably not helpful. Like, you brought police into the house, they probably went home, told their families. Like, word just spreads that way. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So reaching out for Muggle assistance is probably not going to generate better results, frankly. It's understandable completely back in the day. This happened, I think, what they said in the 50s.
50s, yeah.
So you're not gonna, like, finding a qualified psychopomp or medium to help with the situation would have been far more difficult then. Yeah, like, your options were kind of limited.
It's much more natural for them to probably turn to their local church or...
Right, exactly. So this is a situation that was happening, you know, back in the day when the resources were less widespread or less available. Nowadays you can, you know, get online and find somebody, vet somebody as a source, and find somebody who's capable of helping with the situation. You know what I mean? It's a lot easier nowadays to find some actual help or intervention. As always with these cases, like, my 100% recommendation is to step outside of the thought process that something is happening that's bad, evil, or scary. Because most of these cases all begin with some interaction that's very mundane, like opening a drawer or a shaking of a drawer or something being knocked over. It's an attempt to communicate, but it's not necessarily hostile or evil in intent in any way, right? Like, yeah. So there isn't any reason to interpret it in that fashion and start feeding that kind of thought process, putting that kind of energy into it, because plainly you can see in this case and in most cases that energy will escalate the situation and things will become more violent and more powerful, right?
Yeah.
So stepping off of that energy a little bit and just recognizing the attempt at communication, not necessarily evil or whatever, and keeping as many people as you can in the situation calm and not thinking along those lines is the best way to minimize the effects from the start, from the get-go. But if you continue to experience an escalation of energy or an escalation of incidences and they're becoming more violent, or it is, you know, some people in the household can't control their energy about it, right? It's possible, especially young people, to start to be afraid, start to feel frightened, you know, call in some help. It was probably wise that they, like, took the young girl and moved her out of the house for the time being, like, just to get some of that energy out of the mix, you know?
Yeah.
if you need to do that, find somewhere else. For anybody who's having trouble actually processing it, to get away from the situation, to de-escalate the energy. I do find this strangling of pigs odd.
Well, I mean, yeah, that is definitely odd, especially because apparently it happened to, like, all of the pigs, and,
yeah.
That's a lot of dead... Like, they mentioned that they thought that this guy might be in on some sort of hoax because he was friends with the dude in the house, but I'm like, do you strangle your entire host of pigs for a prank? That makes zero sense.
That was sort of my thought on it, is most grown people who are farmers and have all of those pigs, like that pigs is their livelihood. That's...
Yeah, you're not going to do that for a hoax.
Yeah, you're not going to... I mean, and can you imagine going out and strangling your own pigs for... I mean, that's... Who does that?
Some people are crazy enough to do shit like that, but no, I don't think so in
Yeah,
this case.
you would have to be out of your mind to do something like that just so some reporters show up and put attention on you.
Interview you for...
I strangled my entire herd of pigs for this. Like, I don't see that being the case, right?
Yeah.
Like, that's not a logical activity for somebody to be getting involved in. And I guess some people aren't logical, but that doesn't make sense to me, right?
Although it does seem weird for ghosts to do, too. I mean, from what you've told me, I mean, it doesn't seem like ghosts, when they get violent, it's usually in the form of more mundane stuff of rattling things around or occasionally throwing an object at someone. I've never heard of ghosts going around strangling people, pigs, or really anything else, especially in mass.
No, and as a matter of fact, like, I mean, I don't have all of the details of the case. Obviously, I watched the same video you do, but I would almost feel like that sounds like the activity... Maybe our poor 17-year-old who didn't actually want to go off and join the war was, trying to keep the activity alive or whatever, trying to find reasons out, and went over and strangled pigs. I mean, who knows?
Pretty extreme, though.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing, maybe if the young man was starting to show signs of I mean, I hate to call it possession, but possession, he went over and strangled pigs. Possession looks different, a little bit different between like masculine energies and feminine energies. You get a lot of, and children really, you get a lot of the weird channeling and behaviors and floating and stuff around with women and children or whatever. But for a masculine energy that's going through an occupation, it's less likely to look like convalescence or an illness or some sort of like that, and more likely to express itself through some sort of kinetic energy. Right? Think The Shining.
Yeah.
Right? Like a masculine energy going through an occupation situation is more likely to try and take some action or do something kinetically. It's just how the divine masculine energy works. And so, you're more likely to get weird actions and activities like that. So I think, I mean, and again, this is just intuitive or whatever, but it may have actually been the young man in the situation that was strangling pigs.
Be wild, yeah.
Yeah. And it's possible even shoved the lady.
That's an angle I didn't think of.
So, yeah, that's kind of the vibe I get off of it, is some of the stuff that doesn't quite make sense that a spirit would be doing may be a
person being influenced.
Yeah, an energy working through a physical person. Because when, again, like I said, when masculine energies go through a possession situation, or I tend to call it occupation, but whatever, that energy expresses itself in weird physical actions and activities like that. So.
All right. Well, that's certainly a possibility.
Is that a thought you hadn't had on it?
No, that hadn't occurred to me that the spirit could go around, like, influencing people to, like, maybe push your roommate off of a quarry or strangle 50 or so pigs.
Yeah, well, like I said, we tend to think of possession as in The Exorcist. Those types of manifestations, or the possession of Emily Rose, or things like that, because that's when you have, again, it has to do with the, we talked about this in one of the other episodes, for children, young children, and for women, at least for most of history, that kind of a thing, there's the sense of powerlessness, or a sense of surrender, or a sense of, there's no personal empowerment socialized for women and for children in those times, right? But for a masculine personality, we need to do something. Like, men have very much the divine masculine energy, whether you're a man or a woman, has a lot more. I need to do something. I need to take action. I need to take care of something, right? There's a lot more of that in that energy. I am empowered, so I need to do something. So a possession situation coming through a masculine energy will look a lot different than what we typically think of. Like I said, think The Shining.
Right.
Or even real, like, I think sometimes when I look at cases of people like Ted Bundy or people who just seriously problems, right?
Yeah.
Bad problems. That is more how that energy manifests in a divine masculine. So I wouldn't be surprised if it was maybe the young man in this situation who was strangling pigs.
Certainly makes more sense than the farmer doing it.
Yeah. And it makes more sense than a ghost strangling them. I don't know. It seems like the kind of energetic translation a person would make. Like, I need to get this energy out, but I don't know what to do, so you're directing it at pigs. Because it initially, at least, it feels safer than directing it at a person. Do you know what I mean? So, but I need to do something, so I gotta go strangle these pigs. Like, it doesn't make sense, but it's a way to transmute that kinetic energy, the violent energy that you're feeling from a possession situation.
Right.
So,
okay.
That's what I got on that one. Drop us a comment. Let me know if you think we're crazy, if you think we're onto something. Like, subscribe, all of that fun stuff. Y'all.
Yeah.
And we will see you guys next time on
Have a good day,
Unraveling
folks.
the Unexplained.